All right, guys, welcome to the third video for the endocrine chapter. We're going to just pick up where we left off on the last video. We finished the last video by talking about the hypothalamic hypophyseal axis for our 4 different tropic hormones. I wanted to point out one more thing before we move on from that topic, and that is the effects of follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And so as a tropic hormone, we discussed how they both cause the ovaries and the testes to release hormones, either estrogen or testosterone, but they also have some additional effects. And as with many of the hormones, we'll talk about this in more detail when we get to the chapter about these. So when we get to the reproductive system, we'll spend more time talking about these hormones. But they are part of a class of hormones called gonadotropins, and that just means that they act on the gonads and they promote gamete production. All right, so production of the sperm and egg. And so that's in addition to their role in, as a tropic hormone, stimulating the release of additional hormones. And luteinizing hormone also has an additional effect that we'll learn about with the reproductive system, where it's involved with ovulation in the ovaries. Okay, so those 2 hormones kind of have some additional effects on the body as well. Okay, so let's finish up our hormones for the anterior pituitary. All right, so we left off, we talked about our tropic hormones, and so let's talk about our non-tropic hormones. And so the first one is going to be prolactin. And so we said prolactin, well, we haven't said it yet, right? But prolactin, so think of this part of the word, lactin, kind of sounding like lactate, and that's actually its function. So the prolactin stimulates milk production. All right, so its target tissue would be breast tissue, and it'll stimulate and help to maintain milk production. All right, so this would be a hormone that would have an increased production during pregnancy, especially after pregnancy, when you need milk production and you need to maintain that milk production. And actually, the secretion of prolactin is regulated by dopamine and estrogen. Whoops, a little pencil glitch there. Okay, so dopamine and estrogen. All right, so dopamine actually causes a decreased secretion of prolactin, and estrogen promotes the secretion of prolactin. Okay, all right, and so then the next hormone coming from the anterior pituitary is melanocyte stimulating hormone. And so melanocyte stimulating hormone, as the name probably tells you, will stimulate melanocytes. And you should know about melanocytes from A&P1 when you learned about the skin. So those are the cells in the skin that produce melanin, which is the pigment in the skin. So melanocyte stimulating hormone, in addition to stimulating melanocytes, it also has a couple of other effects, and that's as it relates to the hypothalamus. So this MSH will travel to the hypothalamus because it is just traveling through the blood. All right, so it would go to the skin and stimulate melanocytes, and it'll also go to the hypothalamus, and it will cause a decrease in appetite, right? So it suppresses appetite. Goodness. Okay, there we go. All right. So it decreases appetite, and it also contributes to sexual arousal. So it does play a role in sexual arousal through its activation of the hypothalamus. All right. Okay. So that's melanocyte stimulating hormone. And then the last hormone we have from the anterior pituitary is growth hormone. All right, so this obviously would be human growth hormone. And it essentially, based on its name, it causes growth, right? But it's more complicated than that. Its target tissues are many, many tissues in the body, right? So it would be growth, of bones and muscles, and it affects fat and all that kind of stuff, all right? So it's going to affect many tissues, and it also especially acts on the liver. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. And so with growth hormone, you can say that the effects are either going to be direct or indirect. Okay, and so a direct effect would be growth hormone acting on a target tissue and causing some sort of growth or, change in metabolism of that target cell. All right, so acting on a target cell. So it is directly affecting the activity of some sort of cell. And so some of these effects would be causing the cell to increase its uptake of amino acids. All right, so it's going to start taking up more amino acids and kind of conserving them. It's going to increase blood glucose in general. All right. It'll do this by increasing gluconeogenesis. All right. And so it will increase gluconeogenesis. So you may have heard that term in A&P1. You may have not. All right. But gluconeogenesis, just in simple terms, is making glucose from a non-carbohydrate. All right, and so you can make glucose actually from my pencil is having some issues, from a non-carb. You can make glucose from amino acids, from fats. You can make it from many different organic molecules, okay? And so when you do that, that's referred to as gluconeogenesis. So making new glucose from something that wasn't a carbohydrate. All right? And then growth hormone will also have an anti-insulin effect, all right? And that relates to that increase in blood glucose. All right, anti-insulin effect. All right, and then in addition to these effects, growth hormone, another direct effect would just be fat redistribution. So it would affect fat cells and cause them to break down and be redistributed to other areas of the body. All right, so fat redistribution. So those are direct effects. So growth hormone acting on specific cells, causing them to do these things, right? Causing the cells to maybe break down amino acids and make them into glucose, or fat cells to redistribute, that kind of thing. Growth hormone also has indirect effects, okay? And so that means that it actually, this would be where it acts through the liver, all right? So its indirect effects are the growth hormone goes to the liver, and it causes the liver to produce what are called somatomedins. All right, somatomedins. All right, and they also sometimes go by insulin-like growth factor. Okay, these come from the liver, and they are stimulated, their production, by growth hormone. Okay, so growth hormone acts on the liver makes these insulin-like growth factors, and then it is these insulin-like growth factors that are going to go and have an effect on the cells, and that's why it's considered indirect, because it's not the growth hormone causing the effect, it's the insulin-like growth factors causing the effect. Okay, and so some of these effects are going to be building of muscle, right? Strengthening of bone and muscle. We'll just say bone and muscle growth. Okay. And we know that growth hormone can have that effect, and it does that through the insulin-like growth factor. It is going to cause an increase in protein synthesis. That also would relate to making all that muscle in the bone. You need more protein, collagen for the bone, and your myosin and actin for the muscles. And so you'd see an increase in muscle mass, and you would see growth in a bone, either in length if the epiphyseal plate is still present, or in width if it's not, which we'll talk about in a minute. All right, so this would see an increase in muscle mass. All right, and we'll say bone length. We'll do length/width, and we'll kind of talk about that. Some stuff you should have learned in AP 1, right? Coming back. And then this was protein synthesis. Okay. All right. And so those are going to be indirect effects. Okay. So then let's talk about some clinical implications. So if there are problems, let's say with the anterior pituitary and production of growth hormone, maybe there's too much, too little, what effect does that have on the body? Okay, so the first effect we're going to talk about is gigantism. All right, so this would be somebody who is generally about 8 feet tall, maybe taller. All right, so about 8 feet tall. All right, so they're very large. Their bones have grown a lot in length. And that is because they have received a high level of growth hormone as a child. All right, and that's allowed their bones to grow in length. And the important thing kind of visually to understand is that these people would maintain in normal proportions, right? They would just be very tall. Right, so normal proportions. They're just very tall, and that's because as a child, they still have those epiphyseal plates in their bones, and so the growth hormone can act on the bone, and it will grow at the epiphyseal plate, causing those bones simply to grow in length, making the person just very tall, versus some of the effects you see on bone growth after that epiphyseal plate has calcified. All right, so gigantism, growth hormone has to be received in an elevated amount as a child for this to happen when they still have that epiphyseal plate. Okay, and then acromegaly is when somebody receives too much growth hormone as an adult. Okay. And so the difference here is, as an adult, that epiphyseal plate has calcified, and so the bones cannot grow in length anymore. And so what you end up seeing with acromegaly is that there is an increase in finger width, chin width. We'll just say finger, chin, foot, and nose width. All right, because those regions will have bone deposited kind of on the sides, right? Not giving it more length, but it'll increase the width. All right, and so that is acromegaly. With somebody with acromegaly, you'll also see an increase, a very elevated blood glucose. Oops. Okay. All right. And then lastly, we have pituitary dwarfism. Okay. And so pituitary dwarfism comes from a problem with the pituitary gland where that individual does not get enough growth hormone as a child, right? So there's too little growth hormone as a child. Okay, so this is a form of dwarfism. There are multiple types of dwarfism. This is a form that is related to the hormones. And so they don't get enough growth hormone as a child. It is preventable if it's detected, and growth hormone can be given. This individual would also have normal proportions. They would just be short, so 4 foot or maybe shorter, smaller than that. All right, so normal proportions. All right, and so then again, that's because that epiphyseal plate is still intact. All right, and so they're still able to adjust the bone's height, right, their length, rather than having to alter its width. Okay. All right. Now let's move on to talking about the thyroid gland. Okay. So the thyroid gland is a kind of bilobed gland that sits underneath the larynx. Okay, so this would be the larynx, essentially like your voice box. The thyroid gland is going to sit just below the cartilage of that larynx. It has 2 lateral lobes. All right, so that would be one lateral lobe, and then there would be another lateral lobe over here, and they are connected in the middle by the isthmus. All right, so that's in the middle connecting the 2. Okay, and so then if we zoom in to the actual tissue of the thyroid gland, what you're going to see is that it contains a bunch of kind of ring structures. All right, and so these rings are called follicles. Okay, and so a follicle is a collection of cells around some sort of central structure. And so we'll see follicles more than once in different tissues. But by definition, a follicle is a collection of cells around a central structure. All right. Okay, and so then the cells around the central structure are called follicular cells. So that would be these cells right here. They look kind of cuboidal in shape. All right, so these would be follicular cells. And so in the thyroid gland, the follicular cells, their job is to make and secrete that thyroid hormone. Okay, so these follicular cells make thyroid hormone. Okay, and so we'll talk about the process in just a moment of how it makes thyroid hormone, but let's finish talking about everything else we have in this picture. Okay, so our central structure, all right, would be this yellow structure, and so this is called colloid. All right, so colloid is essentially it is stored thyroid hormone. All right, and so specifically when we're talking about thyroid hormone, we refer to T3 and T4. Okay, so these are the 2 thyroid hormones, so T3 and T4. So colloid is stored thyroid hormone. So the thyroid gland is unique among other glands because it actually makes hormone and stores it. Not a lot of other endocrine glands actually have like a stored kind of reservoir of hormone, right? But the thyroid gland does. Okay, so we have our follicle and our follicular cells. And we have our colloid. Okay. Good. And so then the last thing in this picture would be between our follicles, right? So we have cells that are not follicular cells, they're between follicles. These are called parafollicular cells. All right, parafollicular cells are between follicles, all right, and you'll have a bunch of blood vessels also located in between follicles. And so these parafollicular cells are going to secrete the hormone calcitonin. All right, and calcitonin, you probably learned in ANP1 when you're talking about the bones, regulates calcium levels. Okay, so calcitonin is a hormone that regulates calcium levels. All right. Okay, so that's our structure, our histology. And so let's talk about how the T3 and T4 are made by these follicular cells. So if we move down here a little bit, we have, so this would be just one follicular cell here that we're looking at. All right, and so what happens with these follicular cells is that iodine, all right, is going to be pumped into the cell. Okay, so iodine is actively pumped into the cell. I'll just write that here. And so by saying that it's pumped into the cell, that means that it requires ATP. Okay, this is an active process into the cell. Okay, and once that iodine is in the cell, it then combines with the amino acid tyrosine. All right, so tyrosine is an amino acid. It is a non-polar amino acid, which is why this particular hormone is fat soluble, whereas most other amino acid-based hormones are water soluble. Okay, so iodine combines with tyrosine and forms T3 and T4. Okay, and so T3 and T4 just differ based on the number of iodines they have. So T3 has 3 iodines, T4 has 4 iodines attached to that tyrosine. Okay? All right, so that's our thyroid hormone. And so, like we said, the thyroid gland is capable of storing that thyroid hormone. And so it does that by linking them together in chains. Okay, and so these are called thyroglobulin. So thyroglobulin, these are chains of T3 and T4. That's thyroglobulin. Okay, so this follicular cell is going to create T3 and T4. All right, and then it is going to exocytose it, forming this thyroglobulin, and then these chains are just going to stack all together, you know, back and forth in this colloid. So this colloid is made up of many thyroglobulin kind of threads, chains. Okay, all right, so that's how that thyroid hormone is produced. Okay. And so then whenever the cell needs thyroid hormone, right, if the levels of thyroid hormone are low, remember the anterior pituitary secretes thyroid stimulating hormone that'll act on this thyroid gland, and then these parafollicular cells can just endocytose little bits of this colloid as it needs more thyroid hormone to put into the blood. And so a lot of times when you look at slides of the thyroid gland, these little colloids will have like little bites taken out of them where some of the hormone has been endocytosed to be used. Okay, so now let's talk about functions of this hormone. And so thyroid hormone levels vary a little bit throughout the day. So it's going to be a little lower during the day, and then it peaks right before you go to sleep. And thyroid hormone affects almost every single cell in the body. And so let's just write a few of the effects. All right, it's going to increase metabolism. All right, so it's going to increase cells using energy. All right, and so that means that cells are going to be making more energy, right, undergoing more cellular respiration. It can also, remember, it is fat soluble. All right, so it can enter the nucleus. All right, and when it's in the nucleus, it can regulate the expression of cellular respiration enzymes. Okay, so we talked about those fat-soluble hormones regulating gene expression. And so this would be an example of that. So this thyroid hormone is going to bind to its intracellular receptor, travel into the nucleus, and find the genes for cellular respiration enzymes, and it's going to cause them to be upregulated because the cells are going to be going through more cellular respiration, so you would want to make more of these enzymes. All right, so we would see an increase in cellular respiration. All right, that would be the cell trying to make more ATP. All right, remember those are the mitochondria. They're going to be making the ATP through cellular respiration. We'll see as a result of this cellular respiration, there'll be an increase in oxygen use because that's used during cellular respiration, and in heat production. All right, so elevated amounts of thyroid hormone will increase the body temperature just because of that additional cellular respiration that's going on. Some additional effects: thyroid hormone will also increase the heart rate, and it will increase the activity of that sodium-potassium pump. All right, which again requires ATP, meaning we need more ATP made through cellular respiration. Okay, so these are effects of thyroid hormone. So now let's talk about what happens if somebody is either producing too much or not enough thyroid hormone. Okay, so these would be the clinical implications. So hyperthyroidism would be when somebody produces too much, right? So there's an increase in that T3 and T4. Okay, so too much thyroid hormone. All right, and so if we think about what thyroid hormone does, a person with hyperthyroidism would likely be always hot, right? Because their cells are doing a lot of cellular respiration. Their heart rate would be elevated. They feel like their heart was racing all the time. They would lose weight because their cells through cellular respiration are breaking down glucose, and then once you go through glucose, they're going to start breaking down fats, and that will cause weight loss. All right, and then associated, so kind of one cause associated with hyperthyroidism is Graves' disease. All right, so Graves' disease is hyperthyroidism caused by an autoimmune condition. All right, so Graves' disease is an autoimmune condition where the antibodies, there are antibodies in the body that will be against the receptor for thyroid stimulating hormone. All right, and so what it actually does is in Graves' disease, antibodies, and I think this is really fascinating, antibodies mimic thyroid stimulating hormone. All right, and so then it's essentially like the person keeps getting the signal that there's not enough thyroid hormone because their antibodies are mimicking thyroid stimulating hormone. So the thyroid gland is just going to keep releasing thyroid hormone, thus leading to hyperthyroidism. All right, so that's one kind of form of hypothyroidism or cause of hyperthyroidism. All right, so if somebody isn't making enough thyroid hormone, right, so too little T3 and T4, that would be hypothyroidism. And so the symptoms would all be kind of the opposite of what we just talked about. So they would have a reduced heart rate. They would probably be feeling cold all the time, right? So their temperature would be low. And then they would frequently experience weight gain. They would feel very lethargic because their body's not making a lot of energy. All right, so lethargy, weight gain. All right, and that would be associated with hypothyroidism. All right, and so we'll say low metabolic rate because their body isn't going through that much cellular respiration. Okay, good. So that's hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism. Now let's talk about one other condition associated with the thyroid gland, and that is the formation of a goiter. So a goiter is an enlarged thyroid gland. All right, and so the reason a goiter forms is from a lack of iodine in the diet. All right, so lack of iodine in the diet. Okay, and so let's think about this, all right? So if somebody is not getting enough iodine in their diet, if we look kind of at our diagram here, that iodine, they're not gonna have enough to be pumped into the cell to put together with tyrosine and make our T3 and T4. Okay, so they're not gonna they're not gonna have all this colloid in their thyroid tissue, right? They're not gonna make enough thyroid hormone. And so if we recall that hypothalamic hypophyseal axis, let me just scroll back up really quick. We'll take a look at it. All right, for the thyroid gland, so this one up here. Okay, so if this individual is not making enough of our T3 and T4, so it's low, all right, that is going to stimulate the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is going to release thyroid releasing hormone onto the anterior pituitary. It's going to release thyroid stimulating hormone that will tell the thyroid gland, hey, bump up the production of thyroid hormone. But the thyroid gland will try, but it's not able to, all right, because it doesn't have iodine. And so what happens is the thyroid gland just ends up getting bigger and bigger and bigger because it keeps being signaled by thyroid stimulating hormone to make more T3 and T4, but it can't. It actually physically can't because it doesn't have enough iodine. All right, so there's going to be an increase in TSH released. Then we'll just say, but the thyroid gland cannot make more. All right, T3 and T4. Okay, so it ends up enlarging just from this stress and trying to make T3 and T4 in response to the TSH, but it's still not actually even making any hormone. Okay, so that's how a goiter forms. All right. So then our next gland, the parathyroid gland, is associated with the thyroid gland. Okay, and so its location, it is on the posterior side of the thyroid gland. All right, so posterior thyroid. And it actually consists of 4 small glands on the posterior side of the thyroid. All right. They're kind of like almost the size of like little Tic Tacs. Okay, so 4 small glands on the posterior thyroid, and the hormone that it secretes, very appropriately named, is parathyroid hormone. Okay, and so parathyroid hormone is an amino acid based hormone. All right, so amino acid based, meaning it is water soluble. All right, so it is actually, more accurately, it is a protein based. So it's not just one amino acid, right? It's protein based. So it's a few amino acids strung together to form this parathyroid hormone. And its function is to regulate calcium levels. All right, so it's going to regulate calcium levels. Okay. And so if there is too little, right, so not enough calcium in the blood, All right, so let me just write this. Too little calcium in the blood. The parathyroid gland is going to release parathyroid hormone. All right, and then that parathyroid hormone is going to go to the bones where it is going to increase osteoclast activity. So this is one of its effects, all right? So remember, osteoclasts in the bone, these are cells that are going to chew up and break down bone, thus releasing calcium, okay? So then that calcium can go into the blood, all right? So then that will lead to an increase in calcium in the blood, all right? So in addition to acting on bone cells, parathyroid hormone also acts on the kidneys, all right? And so it promotes, we'll say, kidney moving calcium from the urine back into blood, all right? All right, so calcium from urine into the blood. Okay, and so that's one way of increasing calcium in the blood, so making sure it doesn't leave in the urine. All right, and it's involved in calcitriol production. Okay, so it increases or promotes calcitriol, which is activated vitamin D. We know we need vitamin D to absorb calcium from our food. All right, so we're going to increase the production of that. All right, so the activation of that vitamin D. Okay, good. All right, so parathyroid hormone is all about maintaining that calcium homeostasis in the blood. Okay, so now let's talk about kind of dysfunction of that parathyroid hormone. So if we have too much parathyroid hormone, right, that's hyperparathyroidism. Okay, so that would be when there's an increase in parathyroid hormone. And so then the effects of this would be that there would be weakened bones. All right, because think about it, those osteoclasts would just be going to town, breaking down bone when you don't necessarily need the calcium. All right, so the bones would become very brittle and weak. There would be a very high calcium levels in the blood. And also, so as a result of these high calcium levels in the blood, this would depress the nervous system. All right. So having too much calcium in the blood will depress the nervous system. As a result, there will be muscle weakness from that depressed nervous system and some abnormal reflexes. Okay. And then another kind of sign of hyperthyroidism, or result of parathyroidism, would be calcium crystals in the urine. Okay, and so if a medical professional takes a sample of urine, does urinalysis, they will frequently look at that urine under a microscope to see if, one, there's any cells, and two, if there's any crystals. And so if they see calcium crystals, that might be a sign that there's too much calcium in the blood. Okay, good. So that's too much calcium. So then if somebody doesn't have enough parathyroid hormone, all right, so a decreased level of parathyroid hormone, what's going to happen here is that there's going to be very low, all right, blood calcium. So low blood calcium. And that's going to have effects on the nervous system, right? So the nervous system actually becomes more excitable. All right, so instead of being kind of depressed, it's going to be more excitable. And as a result, you'll see like muscle spasms, tingling, you can see convulsions, all from this low blood calcium. All right, so spasms, tingling, convulsions. All right, and then also calcium is very, very important for blood clotting. And so if you don't have enough calcium in your blood, you would have problems with blood clotting. So there would be abnormal clotting if you don't have enough calcium. Okay, so that is the parathyroid hormone. All right, and so lastly, we are going to talk about the adrenal gland. Specifically, we're going to talk about the adrenal cortex in this video, and then we'll wrap it up and talk about the medulla in the next video. Okay, so with the adrenal gland, it is located, all right, on top of the kidneys. So each kidney has an adrenal gland sitting on top of it. All right, and so then if we cross-section an adrenal gland and look at its histology, what you're going to see kind of in general overview is that there's two major layers. So you have this kind of outer edge that's a lighter color on this picture, and then you have this kind of inner area here in the middle. Okay, so the outer part is called the cortex. Okay, so the cortex is the outer part, and then the inner middle part is the medulla. Okay, so you have the cortex and the medulla. The cortex is a much larger part of the adrenal gland. The medulla in the inner part is actually associated with the central nervous system, or the sympathetic, with the sympathetic nervous system. All right, and so epinephrine and that kind of thing are going to come from that medulla. And so that's what we're going to talk about in the next video. Here we're going to focus on that adrenal cortex. Okay, so if we zoom into the adrenal cortex, it has three distinct layers that we see here. Okay, so let's go through the layers and the hormones found there, and we'll talk about those hormones a little bit with each layer. So the outermost layer is called the zona glomerulosa. All right, so this is going to be the outer cortex. All right, and so glomerulosa refers to kind of the ball shape of these cells. Okay, so the cells take on this kind of like round ball structure, and so that's what glomerulosa refers to. All right, and so these cells in that zona glomerulosa are going to be involved in maintaining mineral balance. All right, and so they're called mineral corticoids. Mineral corticoids. There we go. All right, and they function in maintaining mineral balance. All right, and there's one that we are going to focus on, and that one mineral corticoid is aldosterone. Okay, and so aldosterone is again one of these hormones we're going to come back to in the kidneys, right, when we talk about the urinary system. Okay, but aldosterone is released by this outer layer of the adrenal cortex, and it is going to be involved in regulating the balance of two important minerals, which are sodium and potassium. Okay, and so it is going to increase sodium reabsorption. Okay, and so with reabsorption, this is a term we use when we're talking about the urinary system and the kidneys. All we are saying is that something is going to be taken out of the urine and it's going to be put back into the blood. Okay, so we're going to increase the sodium reabsorption, so that would elevate sodium levels in the blood. And we are going to increase potassium secretion. All right, and so secretion goes the opposite way. So we're going to take something from the blood, we want to get rid of it in the urine, and so we're going to take it and secrete it, put it into the urine. Okay, so we're going to be taking back sodium from the urine, and we're going to be getting rid of potassium in the urine, and in response to aldosterone. Okay, and so aldosterone, as a result, it plays a big role in regulating blood pressure. So because we're adding sodium to the blood, all right, so increasing sodium in the blood will increase blood pressure. Okay, and so that's one kind of important function of aldosterone, is in regulating blood pressure. Okay, and so then it also maintains a balance of potassium, because we know potassium can be very high, all right? If it gets high, it's very dangerous. That's what I mean, all right? So you want to maintain levels of potassium, okay? And so also the reason that sodium, increasing it in the blood, increases blood pressure, right, in case you didn't follow this, is that water always follows sodium. So if we take sodium from the urine, we put it back into blood, then water is going to follow that sodium, and so we are essentially increasing blood volume, which will put more pressure on the blood vessels, okay, thus increasing blood pressure. All right. Okay, so that's aldosterone, and aldosterone again is made in that zona glomerulosa. All right, so then our next layer in, this kind of middle layer here, is called the zona fasciculata. And so the cells in this zona fasciculata kind of line up in a line, little fascicles, little lines in that cortex, right? So this is middle cortex. And so in the zona fasciculata, the category of hormones here, they're called glucocorticoids. Okay, and so our specific glucocorticoid that we're interested in is cortisol. All right, and so glucocorticoids are going to be hormones that regulate metabolism. Okay, and so with cortisol, cortisol is going to be, first of all, a steroid hormone, which means it's fat soluble. All right, and so that also means it can go into the nucleus, and it can alter gene expression and regulate different genes. Okay, and the general function of cortisol is to help resist long-term stress. Okay. All right, and so when I think of the adrenal gland, I usually think of like stress response. So the medulla, we said, involves epinephrine. That's that fight or flight response. So that's going to be very short-term stress, like, you know, something frightens you, you're running for your life, a short-term stressor. Cortisol is going to be for that long-term type of stress. You know, maybe you're starving, you don't have enough food, right? Or you're in a desert and you're dehydrated, you don't have enough water, or you have a fever or something like that. So long-term stresses. Okay, so let's talk about a few of its effects. So here's this word again, right? It's going to increase gluconeogenesis. All All right, remember gluconeogenesis is going to be making glucose from other things that are not carbohydrates, like amino acids and fats. All right, so as a result, this is going to increase blood glucose. And in order to do this, we are going to catabolize. All right, so catabolism of, right, that just means breaking down fats and proteins. All right, so your body is going to break down fats and proteins in order to, and glycogen, right? So those glycogen stores can be broken down just to release glucose, okay? In order to increase the glucose. Okay, cortisol also increases sodium in the blood, which we just talked about will increase blood pressure. Okay, sodium in the blood, that will increase blood pressure because remember, water follows sodium, so we'd have a higher blood volume, increasing pressure. Cortisol also has anti-inflammatory properties. All right, so anti-inflammatory. And so this is used medically because, you know, people who have a lot of chronic inflammation, you can get a cortisone injection, right? And that's using these anti-inflammatory properties of cortisol to kind of help relieve that inflammation. Okay, and so additionally, cortisol has anti-immune properties. All right, so it suppresses the immune system, and so one thing it can be used for is with transplants. A lot of times they'll get cortisol injections to help reduce transplant rejection by the immune system. So that's also another important use of cortisol. Okay, it decreases healing. Right, so suppresses healing, suppresses pain. All right, so obviously, like if you're in a long-term stressful situation or you're like experiencing chronic pain, a lot of times this cortisol can be released to help reduce that pain. It's going to decrease collagen production. Right? Remember, you're breaking down all those proteins and using the amino acids to increase blood glucose. So there's not going to be a lot of protein production, right? Because we're breaking down those proteins. Okay, and so then just a reminder for the control of this release of cortisol, this comes from the anterior pituitary. So that hormone ACTH from the anterior pituitary is released, acts on the adrenal cortex, and it releases this cortisol. All right, so it's controlled by that hypothalamic hypophyseal axis, all right, through ACTH from the anterior pituitary. Okay, so we will come back to the zona reticularis. I just want to talk about this kind of a little seesaw here is for our cortisol. Okay, so with the cortisol, you can have overproduction of cortisol, and then you can also have not enough cortisol. Okay, so Cushing's disease results from too much cortisol. All right, so if you have too much cortisol, that is referred to as Cushing's disease. It can result from a problem with the pituitary gland, so maybe you have a pituitary tumor that is causing overproduction of ACTH, or there are some other tumors in different organs that cancerous tissue, those cells themselves can produce ACTH. So there are some lung and pancreas and kidney tumors that can secrete ACTH, causing Cushing's disease. Also, a tumor of the adrenal cortex where this hormone is made could result in overproduction of cortisol. All right, and then also long-term use of glucocorticoid drugs can lead to Cushing's disease. All right, so like cortisone type drugs could lead to this condition. All right, so let's talk about some kind of symptoms or things we see with Cushing's disease. So with Cushing's disease, obviously this person would have a very high blood glucose. All right, because that is one thing that cortisol does, right? So it increases blood glucose. This is referred to as steroid diabetes. All right, so that would be diabetes essentially resulting from this elevated amount of cortisol. All right. And then the sodium levels in the blood would be high, right? So there'd be a high sodium that would cause high blood pressure. And as a result, kind of from this elevated cortisol over a long time and this high blood pressure, that could lead to edema, right? So you'd see kind of swelling in the limbs and that kind of thing as a result. And then with Cushing's disease, because the body is breaking down a lot of this fat and the fat ends up being redistributed a lot of times, you can see some kind of characteristic signs of fat redistribution. And so these are referred to as when the fat is redistributed around the face, all right? This person, so you'll see what is called a moon face. And so that person's face just becomes very round, right? Instead of kind of being more oblong, it's just very, very round because of the fat redistribution from this cortisol. And then also another location the fat will redistribute to is the back of the neck. And this is in kind of medical situations referred to as a buffalo bump. All right, so you'll see this kind of bump form on the back of the neck. That is from too much cortisol. All right. And then we'll also see, because of all that protein being broken down, protein catabolism, we can see muscle and bone wasting with Cushing's disease. Okay. And so that's from breaking down the protein to use for making glucose, right? To elevate that blood glucose. Okay, so that is Cushing's disease with too much cortisol. And then there's Addison's disease with low cortisol, right? You're not producing enough cortisol. So with Addison's disease, these individuals, first of all, would have a very low blood glucose, all right, and low blood pressure. Okay, and so as a result of not having a lot of cortisol, these individuals would be very poorly adapted at enduring stresses, all right? And so what happens is they're prone to what are called Addisonian crises, right? So an Addisonian crisis is when this individual encounters some sort of stress and they cannot cope with it, all right? So cannot cope with stress. All right, and so an example of this would be maybe, a sudden temperature change. We live in Georgia, so maybe going from a very nicely air-conditioned house to like the middle of the summer, 90 plus degrees outside, could be difficult for someone with Addison's disease because they would have a hard time coping with that change in temperature. Or even if they got sick and had a fever, that would be very difficult for them to cope with. in their if their blood glucose dips, like they don't eat for a while, that would be difficult for them to cope with because they don't have that cortisol to kind of help them. Okay, so that's Addison's disease. All right, and then we just have our last kind of layer, all right, of our adrenal cortex here. That is the zona reticularis. All right, and so the zona reticularis, in the zona reticularis, it is going to be responsible for the production of androgens. All right. And so androgens are basically just sex hormones. All right, and so this is the adrenal cortex contributes very minimally to sex hormone production in individuals. Most of that is going to come from either the ovaries or the testes, all right? But the adrenal glands do have some role in producing androgens. So in males, these androgens would be testosterone, all right? And in females, they would be estrogen, okay? All right. Okay, and so that wraps up the adrenal cortex. All right, so we're going to stop there for this video. And so for the last one for this chapter, we will continue talk about the adrenal medulla with epinephrine, and then the pancreas and a few other endocrine organs.